Okay, good evening. I think we'll just start, and then those who come as we go along, I know it's the evening, people are in traffic, but they'll join as we go so that we can get our conversation going. So good evening once again. My name is Florence Shako. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Education Policy and Climate Justice. We tend to call it Kcse. It's an organization that was established with the goal of developing and executing research and also policy engagement, policy reform, and strategic litigation in two major areas. So the areas were education policy and climate justice. And our vision is really to be global leaders in those areas. My interest in it stems from the fact that I've been an academic of very many years. I started teaching in 2010 at Strathmore University. I was also teaching at Riara University for the past 7 years and up until 2021. After that, I formed Mitula Shako and Associates Advocates, which is a boutique law firm in Nairobi that is based on social justice values. And once we started the work with my business partner, Gilbert, who I'll be introducing shortly, that's when we thought of the idea of coming up with this center. I think education is a big topic right now in the country, and as Kcse, we want to actively engage in the fight for Kenya's children's right to education. We want to make sure everyone has access to education and that the system we have, where it is broken, we can see reforms taking place. So that means tackling factors like poor performance in schools. So we just had the recent Kcse 2022 results, and those results were not good. They revealed that about 55% of the students failed. They had D+ and below. And the question is, where do those students go, right? So we have to be here to have, we are here to have a very good discussion. And as Kcse, we hope to identify and brainstorm basically creative ways in which we can tackle factors that affect poor performance in schools. And that was really the genesis of this webinar. So we want students to have better learning experiences and better results, and so that they can have a good future. We do not want to be part of a system that is churning out students who are failing, and that jeopardizes their future in different spheres. So I encourage everybody to take up this opportunity for this webinar. Please feel free to engage. We have a chat that you can post any comment or question as we go on, and be able to participate. We are also streaming live on YouTube, which means that later you can look at the recording, see what we discussed about, and we hope that in future you'll be part of the Kcse family. Soon on the chat box, you'll be able to see the hashtag for this webinar, which will be hashtag Kcse, which means the Center for Education Policy and Climate Justice, and another hashtag will be education policy. So as you tweet or give any comment, you can use the hashtags. But I don't want to take too long in introducing this webinar. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day, and that is Gilbert Mitula Omware. He's the one who's going to take us through the different speakers for the day and moderate the different sessions that are there. Gilbert is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He's the managing partner of Mitula Shako and Associates Advocates, and he's an alumni of Oxford University. He has been in the pro bono space of legal aid for a very long time, helping the poor and the marginalized, helping them to access justice that they otherwise would not have. What does that mean? If somebody doesn't have money for representation, Gilbert goes to court for free, basically, and helps them to access justice. He's also the chairperson of the Association of Pro Bono Criminal Lawyers in Kenya, and he continues to help the vulnerable and the poor in his significant contributions to strategic litigation. He's a trustee of the Center for Education Policy and Climate Justice, and we are really happy to have him here. So Gilbert, without any further ado, You can continue to introduce the speakers and just give us a brief introduction of what the webinar is about. But again, I'd like to welcome all of you for logging in for our inaugural webinar. We are super excited as Kcse, and we hope to see you partner with us for even more webinars in the future. So thank you. And Gilbert, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Florence, for that introduction. That's very kind. I'm so excited to be here today and to also have the privilege of inviting every single one of us to our inaugural webinar. What I'd want to say is this is a brilliant conversation today. It's about results, and it's about results measurement and measuring performance, as it were. And that might not necessarily be in and of itself an exclusive measure of learning, but as it were, it could be an indicator as to what is happening. I also want to say that I have a background in education policy, which is how I met our first panelist that I'm going to introduce, who is Dr. John Mugo. Dr. John Mugo is my mentor. Let me make it personal first. And he is the executive director of Zizi Afrique Foundation, which is based in Nairobi. His work for many, many years is around generation and use of evidence for the holistic development of children and youth, so that we can equip them with competencies for learning, working, and living. You can see that's a mouthful in and of itself, and he'll break it down to us. His research and programs address key themes connected to learning competencies, whole child development, parental engagement and empowerment, and SEL assessments, among others. He leads the assessment of life skills and values in East Africa Alive, among other education initiatives. Previously, which is where I met him, John headed the Uwezo Learning Assessments in East Africa and chaired the Department of Special Needs Education at Kenyatta University. I think it is also safe to say that John is very well respected in the education space. The second person that I would wish to introduce is Maria Mbeneka. Interestingly, another mentor and supporter in my life. So you can see maybe this is a personal webinar for me. Maria is a partner at Kimani Kabucho Mbeneka. Am I right? You can nod, still the case. And has been in private practice for the past 18 years. She's a council member of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, representing East Africa and the Seychelles, former member of the Council of the Law Society of Kenya, where she served us as the treasurer and general member representative from 2018 to 2020, immediate former vice president of the East Africa Law Society, having served from 2016 to 2018, and really well accomplished and respected. I think if I continue to read Maria's CV, I might finish the rest of the webinar. So I will leave it at that and let Maria introduce everything else that she wishes during her time speaking. Very lastly, I want to introduce Dr. Julius Otundo, who I taught with at Riara University. Dr. Otundo is a renowned educationist and education consultant with close to 3 decades of active service in the education industry, especially on curriculum reforms in Kenya. He's participated in teacher training for the new curriculum as one of the key trainers of the CBC curriculum, and is also an expert in international education, teaching and learning pedagogies, inclusive education, and innovative assessment, among others. I can say that Dr. Otundo has been in the classroom before, he has led schools before, he is now a researcher in various capacities and is developing a lot of the knowledge that we have on learning in this country. This is the panel that we have, and we are extremely privileged to have each and every one of them taking time out to talk with us today. I wish for us to just go straight into our subject, and let me launch into it with this aspect. Dr. Mugo, could you just lay a foundation of this discussion for us by telling us, are our children failing? Or what is happening? Since you measure performance and have measured learning for many years, are they failing or are we reading it wrong?
Thank you so much for this honor, Gilbert and Florence, inviting me to come and interact with the great minds here. I want to begin with a story. a short one. July of 2012, we were in Kcse. And because there was then a national education conference. And I remember then, of course, I was much younger and energetic, more than now. And when I spoke, I presented findings from our learning assessment showing how education was failing, actually 70% of the population of learners. And then the then Secretary General of the Kenya National Union of Teachers took the platform and referred to me as a very good product of a very good education system. And that Kenyan students, like you, Gilbert, renowned wherever they go in Oxford and Yale and other places. They beat others in the world. And what I told him when I went back to the got the mic again, I told him if for him good education is education for the few survivors of a bad system, then let it be. I asked him to ask me the students, the children I began standard 1 with at Dindiroku Primary School, where they were and how many of them had reached where I was. And when I refer to this as an education of survivors, I think it's a really unfortunate thing, because when you look at the failure rates are really high. We may want to sanitize it and use euphemism to say that they can go for TVET, they can do entrepreneurship, there are many things they can do, but we label them as failures so that they do other things. It's actually quite ironical, because when we have 55%, and by the way, this is an improvement from a big one from last year, 68% D plus now coming to 55%. So I would want to talk about 5 things. I was reflecting earlier today about the 5 things that in my thinking we need to address if secondary education is to offer much more to every child or every student. I will talk about the dangers of the sorting effect. I'll talk about structured inequality. I'll talk about lack of accountability for learning, about the cost of schooling and condemnation of the poor. I'll talk about the demerits of high-stake examinations. So first, I hope we all know that following the 100% transition, there has been very steady movement of the population of secondary schooling in the country. The population has risen by an average of around 7 to 10% per year, which is really a lot. And now the population is standing at close to 3.5 million students. And this has been a very good thing, because now Kenya, I think, is among the leaders on the African continent in terms of the population of students in secondary school as a proportion of the overall people of that age. But now, unless if the secondary schooling delivers quality for the learners, then the gains of secondary schooling may not be realized in full. Now, first, what happens, and what I'm calling the sorting effect, is that at primary school, when KCPE results are released, students are separated based on 2 things. One is academic ability, and the other is a social connection or network. Those that perform better go to better schools, schools of their own. And those that did not perform so well but have the social connections join them. And we know that we have a relationship between household poverty, parental level of education, home support, school quality, and performance. So when this sorting happens, that the best go to national schools, the second best go to extra county schools, and those that did not perform well or know no one go to sub-county schools. So 3 things happen. One is that we withdraw the power of peer support to learning. Naturally, you are supposed to be seated next to somebody who is differently abled as you are. And so there are documented benefits of students who are academically or intellectually gifted sitting with those that are less gifted, and not just the less gifted that benefit, but even those gifted benefit, because these others introduce them to other ways of holistic education and balancing. And so this sorting withdraws that benefits of peer support. The second thing is the shifting of power and accountability. If you go to national schools, they are full of children of more educated and richer parents. They access the better schools, the better quality structures. The parents, of those in sub-county schools, those that did not go to school as much or are not able even to pay for boarding schools. And these are the ones who are unable to, even when a meeting is called for the school, to contribute and to hold the school management to account. And so that shift of power and accountability, concentrating it in some schools and withdrawing it from others, leads to a lack of accountability for learning that I'll talk about later. And the third effect is the psychological effect. When you don't perform well in Kcse and you are sent to a school where no one has passed for the last 7 years, it is, it would have to be a miracle for you to pass. And so you start from a point of losing hope, of self-pity, for sure that you are condemned, and certainly after 4 years you'll fail. This and so these students lack self-efficacy, they lack self-trust, self-belief, and their self-concept is really low. So this sorting effect that happens at primary school, I think is something that we need to look at, and we see what policy might disrupt this, so that the secondary school is as natural as the primary school is. The second is a structured inequality. We have a lot of evidence that demonstrates that national schools and extra county schools are favored over county and sub-county schools. And you can look at all indicators, starting with infrastructure, going to better principals. If a principal demonstrates a good performance from a sub-county school, they are promoted to go to an extra county school, as though those in sub-county schools are not entitled, have no rights to a good principal. If teachers, if you look at TPAD and how teachers are evaluated, those teachers that post better results are taken up to other schools and withdrawn from sub-county schools. And so you wonder why this parent called government gives birth to children and discriminates them. So we need really to rethink, because if you look at research, for instance, and evidence on even visits by the quality assurance and standards from the ministry, you find that the same schools that do well are the ones that are more visited, and those that are in the frontiers, are in the arid areas, are sub-county, that don't perform well, where these people should be spending all the time, are the ones that go for years without a person from the quality assurance stepping in them. And so this disfavor, this discrimination, this structured in exclusion of the poorer school is something that cannot be addressed through the pro rata, capitation that we have, that every student now in our secondary school, government allocates 22,000, 244. And the sub-county schools are small, which means if a school has 200, let's say as a small school somewhere, and you give them 22,000 for each student, another school has 2,000 students, give them the same. And the school that has 2,000 students are the ones with the laboratory, are the ones with, parents who are able to supplement and hire more teachers and so on. So we actually see that the inequities through these funding models are expanding. rather than narrowing. Then the third effect is a lack of accountability for learning. When students pass, that teacher has higher prospects for promotion by the Kcse, as I said. When prize giving is organized by the school, they are able to get a token, and you see them being highlighted. When your students pass as a principal, you stand a better chance to be moved to a bigger, richer school where you have access to more resources. And when the prize giving comes at the county level, you are also recognized and rewarded. But what happens to schools and teachers where none of the students passes, where all students fail? The only sanction is that those teachers and principals don't get to be heard about. But is that really about enough? And how about the child? So this I think when the CS is announcing results and talking about good schools, I think he should also be talking about bad schools. So that the story of those schools where no student passes, where all students are condemned, we also have accountability for them because they are as much government schools, just like the others. The fourth is the cost of schooling. Secondary school is costly, especially the boarding school, and the boarding school remains unaffordable for more than that of Kenyan parents. And so there are studies showing the effect of fees, how this remain a barrier, and how even the low physical access to secondary school, boarding school, and all that condemns the poor. But what one would do is if one calculated the quantity of learning in terms of the hours of interaction between a student and a teacher, you find that there is always that proportion that is sent home for fees, that is sent home for various reasons. Some miss even a school term, when they come back, and we know all these stories. So that loss of contact hours for students, from poorer backgrounds and so on, is a huge cost. Is a big leakage of learning, and is a big cause of non-performance. But also schools that have no laboratories, what do you expect? Or schools where teachers are not motivated, schools where teachers are always fought by parents and all that, then really the iniquities are very loud. And so unless if we have, for instance, the scholarships and the bursaries are available, getting better targeted for the poor, unless if we have a differentiated financing model that favors those at the bottom of the pyramid, then we are not going to see more learning happening from the bottom. And so again, these are issues that need to be looked at. And lastly, I talk about the demerits of high-stake examinations. We examine every subject and every topic that we teach. I think there was a study by the UNESCO Institute of Statistics that mapped where the high-stake examinations are globally, and then also mapped where learning never happens. And when you look at the continents, the one shocking thing was that over 70% of the global high-stake examinations are in Africa. And of course, we know that it's in Africa also where learning outcomes are lowest globally. So I don't know why we have held to this belief that high-stake examinations is what we need. Actually, high-stake examinations are counterproductive to the learning process. And so the anxiety and the stress that comes to students really counters, the benefits of learning. Inability to concentrate in the weeks building up to examinations, looking at students who really know that they were doing well in a certain subject, and when the results come, they are actually shocking you, because that mental, psychological, emotional condition of the examination is actually not what we would wish for our children. The mistrust now that has come to, school-based assessments, the distrust for the teacher. You wonder why in the same country, when these students who are subjected to very high-stake examinations proceed to the university, they meet there Dr. Otundo, who examines them himself and gives them marks. But the secondary school teacher, the primary school teacher can't be trusted. We don't think that they can mark correctly. So how come in the university and in colleges, the marking happens correctly? So I think moment has come for us now to question this high-stake examinations and do away with them. Of course, one of the reasons why I've been a supporter of CBC is because we think that CBC might be able to, disrupt many of this if we allow it as Kenyans and as the teachers in the classroom, because formative assessments now having more of them, removing now that high-stake Kcse, I think we had lost direction, and we thank President Ruto for making that bold move. Why does it make sense to examine, using policemen to go to classrooms of grade 6 children who are going to proceed to a grade 7 that is just next next door? So I think this drunkenness, this obsession with examinations at the various level also has been pretty counterproductive. Let me stop there because it will be important also to listen to others and also get to respond to questions. Back to you, Mitula.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mugo, for that very elaborate presentation that makes me feel like I want to go back to education research right now to really explore some of these factors that you are bringing out, as I understood it, the sorting effect, the structural inequities, the high-stake examination and its demerits and so forth. I want to take a bit of a turn and we are talking about exams. So really, with the dire scenario that you have presented, and dire to only mean that there is more to be done and there are opportunities to do better. Maria, who do you think is responsible for all of this? Is there someone we should be blaming, or is it all of us who should blame ourselves for where we are at? Even before we say we want to go and do better, who is it that we should be talking to about this? Is it just government?
Gilbert, I'm one of those people who thought, are the kids really failing when you frame the question for this discussion? Yes. And I think that particular approach about passing and failing, I think that's where the problem is, and John has given a very good context. And if we actually go back to remember how Kenyans express their will is through the Constitution and subsequently through the laws that are then passed in Parliament. And when there was a clamor for the change in the Katiba, Kenyans said that they want their children to have compulsory, not necessarily compulsory, but they wanted their kids to have a right to education. So Article 53 is what captured the wishes of Kenyans. So then that Article 53 gave rise to the Basic Education Act. But even before the Katiba came into place, remember former President Mwai Kibaki, when he became president, the first thing he did, and that was on the promise of his campaign, was that he said that all children must be able to go to school. What happened then? Classes were flooded. Everybody and their grandfather and grandmother were going to school. And why was that? I think that's the thing we need to ask ourselves. And even before we ask ourselves at the point of 2000 and 2001, think about colonialism, because it's very important for us to understand where we're coming from so that we are guided about where we are and where we're supposed to be headed. My parents, at least my dad, went through a system of education that, first of all, exited you at standard 4. So they had an exam at standard 4, so that if you passed that word, passed or failed, then you were able to proceed to standard 8 back in the day. I think that was Kcse. And then from then on, you were able to go to secondary school and then able to go to college or university. Now, back in the day, if you were able to go up to high school, finish high school, jobs were almost guaranteed for educated Black Africans. And why was it designed that way? If you look at the design during colonialism and subsequently when we got independence, if you go back to session paper number 10, education approach was that it was on the background of people who are amenable to development. And just think about the wording, amenable, and that meant that they were closer to infrastructure. Where was the infrastructure? Where were the established schools? So follow that thread, colonialism, post-colonialism, what really changed? Other than the fact that you had more Africans going to school, nevertheless, paying school fees. So meaning that the inequality was even more pronounced, despite the fact that we were free. And then you had 844, which I am a beneficiary of. And the obsession, I remember, I think when I was going into primary school, there was such a clamor to join public schools, because I went to a public primary school, actually 2 of them. And it was a problem to get into the schools because the quality of education in public schools then was actually much better. It was considered a good thing for your child to be able to get into public school, and subsequently secondary. But now, when you look at the way we as parents are parenting our kids, we are opting to go to private schools, have our kids study there because of their attention, because the numbers, teacher-student ratio is better in private schools as opposed to public schools because of the resources that have been allocated, as explained before. But then there's a clamor to get into secondary schools that are public secondary schools because pass rates are guaranteed or they're better for whatever reason. So this obsession with first of all, even how the media classifies these schools have passed. This, there is even predictions in our WhatsApp chat groups about which schools have done well and which ones have qualified with X number of candidates with A's and B's. So the approach as a society is that we have become more obsessed with the actual passing of the exam as opposed to the quality of education that these children are getting. So who do we blame? It's not just one person. We can't say it's the government alone. The government doesn't operate on its own. It's a government of the people by the people. So if parents are actually minded to think about what it is you want to get out of the education system, if we stop commercializing grades, because that's exactly what is happening, in my opinion. I'm not an education expert here, but I have seen enough and participated enough in my life as a lawyer and part of it as a public in the public sphere to understand that unless you have money for your child to go to secondary school, they're likely going to drop out at standard 8. And yet we have a law that says that every child, that is the Basic Education Act 2013, that says every child has a right to basic education. Yet, and basic education has been described to mean up to Form 4. But what is happening when they get out of standard 8? They cannot access basic education because they're asked for 21,000. Now I understand it's 21,000 shillings for uniform alone in most schools. And this is just a basic secondary school. So the blame game, Gilbert, is not necessarily one person, it's an ecosystem. And that's why I said when I tweeted about why the cheating is so prevalent in schools is because it's a vicious cycle. If your kids pass in this primary school, you're guaranteed to get an influx of kids coming into your school because parents want that pass. Kids are under pressure to get grades as opposed to learning. So I think that's the way I would look at it.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think one of the things we'll have to come back to is the market of education, the commercialization, as you put it, and really get to the point of this system that we are talking about. What kind of system is it? What are the philosophies and the politics of that system? What are the drivers in this system that give us the outcomes that we are seeing right now? Of course, Dr. Mugu has talked about some factors like the structural inequities and what that means, right? So with that in mind, I want to invite Dr. Otundo, if he is here with us. I know he had a few issues.
Right, yes.
Otundo, please,
yes,
could you tell us from a teacher's perspective, now that you are representing, I'm making you represent the ones in the classroom. What are your views on this issue? What is the take from a teacher's perspective? What is going on?
Good, thank you, and I'm very grateful for this webinar, Jackson. And it's a great moment that you began the year like this, and yourself and Shako. This is incredible. And when I hear I was to be in something different at this same time, but when you reached out to me and talked about this webinar, I was very impressed, because when it comes to education, you can call me at 2 a.m. and we can speak. Because if there's anybody who bleeds about what is happening in this country, about education, it is me. And I have had a chance to handle students from the lowest level to the highest level. I've had a chance to teach teachers who handle ECDE, teachers who handle primary schools, and those ones who handle higher education, high school, secondary schools, and then higher education. I've had a chance to teach teachers who teach international curriculum, not only in Kenya, but even in other countries. And first, the word failure and success in regard to examination seemingly sent me quite aback. But because the topic is already here, we'll discuss. Because I have seen much of children's success being defined by a summative assessment. And when you look at the international curricula, look at British national curriculum, you look at international baccalaureate, you look at schools that practice the Waldorf School of Art, students are awarded through progressive learning. And that means formative assessment takes a wider scope or a higher percentage of the student's success in learning. Unlike that, Kenya, we've had so much of the summative assessment. And that's why there's a lot of stealing, because if we only look at a child's learning at the end of 4 years to address this child as success or failure, it means that we do not value the progressive learning. And so what happens is that there is too much teaching, but learning doesn't take place. In Kenya, we do not seem even to address the issue of tracking performance. Remember, these kids who have failed, who have, in quotes, termed to have failed, graduated as very successful kids in ECDE. And I think your time, Jackson, I think that your time, you people graduated and you had a nice cap at ECDE. But there's nobody who tracks, after those kids graduated and went to primary school, what happened in between. And again, the tracking from primary to high school. And unfortunately, while we have so many primary private schools producing high scorers, those high scorers end up into national public schools. Very few private secondary schools receive students who have performed highly. Many of the high performers end up in the national public schools. We are never interested as a country to track value addition. And I get so much worried that if I give a school 400 marks, and in that school, those are straight A's from primary, and in that school, say I've given Alliance 400 marks and above, those are straight A's. How comes in the same school, we begin to get C? How comes in the same school, parents are called upon to pay extra money, is called motivation fee? What happens with the A student who then drops and gets a C? is there anybody who even thinks about awarding a school in my village where none of the students scored 400 marks, but in the same school, a student got a C+. I have seen schools in the village where the highest student has 230, 220, but in the same school, we get someone scoring as high as a B+ or something. So what is the value addition? Teachers on the other side have been categorized into a national school teacher and into an extra county school teacher, a county school teacher, and a sub-county school teacher. But all these teachers went to the same college, same university, somehow, but others are being graded high because of the nature of the students they receive. So what are these? There is a mismatch in tracking student performance. There is no corrective tracking from primary school to to secondary schools. There is also a mismatch in pedagogies of teaching that take place at primary school, because most of our primary school teachers teach, and all students depend on what teachers teach. And that's why in many of those schools, you find boarding school students being in class up to 9 p.m. You find some of the school students leaving school as late as 6. I have no idea why students must leave school that late, when in essence, examination is set against what we call learning outcomes or objectives. So what is a mismatch here? Most of the exam students do at Kcse, many of them have no connection with the expected learning outcomes. And that's why students even panic. Because if we set exams based on the learning outcomes, I will tell you that there will be no way you'll be addressing a massive failure. So that mismatch may need to be addressed. And our 100% success has been aligned with summative assessment. As a way forward, it is what CBC is embracing, to have formative assessments take a higher percentage as opposed to summative. And that's exactly what we do at the university, where there is a stake for formative assessment as part of the assessment. There is a bit of trust on me as a lecturer to assess students, submit to the Senate. Those mechanisms are not adhered to at high school level. A student studied for 4 years, and up to the last year, that's when a student is assessed. Another thing that I begin to see is that our teachers are not retooled. Most of the time, our teachers take self-initiative to go back to school. But the issue of having a purposeful professional development for teachers in this country has not been done very well. Like, we have the teacher professional development, which is taking place at the moment. But of course, many teachers are not up into it because of one reason. They feel that the employer should be able to pay. And of course, that has been an argument all along. But for many years, teachers have not been retooled enough. And so even understanding the modern teaching pedagogies to release students who can be able to match with industry has become a serious challenge. Teacher-student ratio, surely at 100% transition, and you give one teacher. I've gone to some schools where when I'm going to look at our teachers on TP, and you find a classroom has 80 students in high school against one teacher. Let me know which quality is going to be here. So it's going to be more of quantum as compared to quality. And so it will look like now one student, those students who are able to fend for themselves, they will achieve. Those ones who are unable, they won't. So teacher-student ratio, it means there's an equal teacher-student ratio, and that means we cannot offer quality, and that will affect the outcome. The next one, as I come to finish, is student resource ratio and inequality in distribution of resources. If we talk about one student, one book per subject, is it happening? The answer is no. If it has to happen, then the students have to dig into their pockets and buy books. And that means that we end up having schools that are well threshold with parents who are able, they will buy those books. But a student who comes from a grandmother with no income at all, they will not have. So the issue of an equal distribution of resources or unequal access to learning resources is another one. Media have tried to do very well, but media only sells the ones who get A. It doesn't sell value progression. How I believe if media decided to start selling value progression and say, Florence Shako joined this school with 222 marks, which is a D+, and her value progression has ended up into a C+, I'll be very happy about it. But unfortunately, we only celebrate one category of people who seem for students called S scorers. The increase of private education, in as far as it's a good thing because they are providing alternative education to this country, but I'll tell you that is already causing discrimination. And it is so much that it is hitting onto Article 53 of the Basic Education Act 2013. It is also hitting onto Article 54 in line with special needs children, because most of the children with special needs basically may not have strong muscles to, some of them, not all, to really push it hard the way the other regular students do it. There has been a challenge on that. And then even on the girl-boy child education, in terms of gender, as well, is a challenge. So in as far as there is an increase in private schools, but that again is affecting the quality of education in public, because all of us seated here, I am sure, John Muga, if you ask him where the child goes to school, he'll tell you it's a private school. If I ask Florence where she went to school and where her children are about to go to school, the same. And so the big question we must ask ourselves, what is happening with this child in the slum? We cannot as a country purpose to look at the weakest point of the children in places that are marginalized and have challenges in accessing quality, then an education becomes a problem. And then lastly on this, I want to mention marking. You know, one script is 78 shillings for science, and I think for social sciences is 58. We all know. Everybody wants money. Tell me why I would waste time reading script from a school coded to come from the lowest end of the village and not get interested in only reading faster and awarding marks. I will tell you, some of the students who have been awarded D-, D+, B, must have even scored an A. But because there is no proper, and I will say this very strongly, that I don't think that we are checking on the marking in a way that is required. You remember recently there was a center that teachers went on strike and walked out, and others were just ushered in immediately. So who really assessed the progression of the first group that marked and the second group that came in? What about if the first group, because of being annoyed, decided to fail the students? So basically, the way the markers are treated, sleeping in the dormitories, marking a national examination, and not being paid well, they can fail the students. They can be reacting and saying, let's do this so that we see where we'll head up to. So we should not be proud to see students getting lower grades and feel it is not associated with the way we treat the markers. I think with that, and then the harsh economic state, I would want to mention it. If we want to improve the quality of education in this country, it is important we look at improving the quality of life for the Kenyan people. Because where there is a serious problem in terms of performance is for children who come from low-income homes. And that's why they end up in day schools. But there's also one thing I want to mention. We are trying to confuse as a country boarding fees against tuition fees. Education is free. So one of the things I will do is to ensure that we have as many quality day schools as possible. So that when you talk about even ratio to resources, we have enough laboratories in local primary schools as opposed to enough laboratories on only specific secondary schools. CBC is coming here to sort out the problem, but the challenge will be there'll still be an equal distribution of resources. The government has talked about employing teachers, but many of them are interns. Really, honestly, I don't think if interns will be able to offer quality education that we expect at this point. Thanks. I think I can stop it from there to allow any more questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. for that incisive analysis of the issue. which sort of leads me to one overarching idea that I want to throw back to our panel. Is education a market subject to market shifts and changes? Is it a right that we should be accessing as part of a public good that is owed to us by the government? And what is it for? Because that essentially then will guide us on what is passing and what is failing, because that has been part of the big debate is if a student's performance in the exam is ranked at a D+, does that mean the student didn't learn? Does that mean we are looking at the student's future prospects in the market? Or does that mean the student was locked out of their right to education to an extent because they were really not given the appropriate resources? Of course, for us, when we have a legal perspective to it, we ask ourselves, what is the right to education? And if you have not been given all the resources and all the facilities required to access that right, does the government owe you something? On the other end, we think of it as a market. And we ask ourselves, okay, so this means that there are certain inputs and investments you make and you expect certain returns out of it, and it is part of a system that manages it. So let me just throw this back to John, Dr. Mugo, and ask, what are we doing here? Are we fighting to keep the education market afloat? Or are we fighting to keep the skills and values of this nation intact based on our education policies? Or what is going on? Where are we headed?
Thank you, Gilbert, for this. I think the hope that the CBC brings is that education will not be for the top 15%. Because when you look at statistics over last years, those that are able to get a C+ and above, are still below 20%. And even though this has grown, I remember during our time it was somewhere around 7%. Now it's headed to 20%. But still, how about the 80%? Who accounts to them? Because why then did they have to spend all that time with a dream of going to the university, and after 12 years we tell them they can't? Why shouldn't we have told them at 7 years? And you already knew that. So I think the focus on multi-talents, the varied competencies that each person has, because it is not natural that everyone in the population will be academically gifted. And it is also not necessary, because there are so many other things also that are important to the population. And so we focusing now on every person and their potential, and letting education grow that potential, rather than you finishing education and then us figuring out, so what do we do with you because you got an E? We should have promoted sports because you are the best footballer, the school head, or you are the best artist, the school head. You are the one heading the debate club and the best in language. So we really can't use sciences to condemn you when your area is arts, and also the other way around. So that appreciation of the multi-talents, the multiple intelligences that the general population has is what now we will hold the school to account for. And the other thing that is very key is the development of also other growth areas beyond academics that these young people need to navigate life. Aspects like life skills, for instance, we know that they will be in charge of many decisions to make for themselves and for their families and for society. Aspects of value-based education, we know that if you follow these graduates of Kcse over time, you find that there comes at around 7 to 10 years down the line a very sharp differentiation, that regardless of what you studied, regardless of the field that you are in, those personal characters, those personal values, the grit, the resilience, the, being able to handle conflicts and, frustration are the ones now that drive success. And the currency of the academic score at, Form 4 level diminishes. So how come we have for so long ignored this very fact that we see out here, that you, Gilbert, are not where you are because of the score you got in your Kcse? There are many people who are sharper than you, and they have not established a center. There are many lawyers who are being now collected from the trenches because they are they are drunk and others have died. So the whole essence that we will focus on holistic development of the young person, rather than just looking at one-sided as though all that the world needs is a brain. So that focus, that there is always this talk, and I see you are also about climate justice, that we will leave a better world for our children, to also thinking about leaving better children for the world. Flipping it all over and focusing on the whole person, I think is where our education must head.
I just love that quote, better children for the world. Not just a better world for the children, but better children for the world. Before I invite Maria to make her comments, I want to say that we have our chat section. You can see it at the bottom of your screens. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat section, and we'll be able to post them. We already have one. I'm recording a number of them. When we come to our question and answer section, kindly just indicate who you are directing the question to, and then jot down your question there, and we will pose it. If it's to the general panel, then it is well. We'll also pose it as it is. Maria, I had asked the question: are we in a market, or are we in a rights-based state? And actually, you had pointed out the whole issue of having officers with guns in classrooms to oversee standard 6 or grade 6 examinations. And you know how this issue progresses, that when security forces are now coming in to supervise a public good and making education a security issue, instead of making it a learning issue and a learning outcomes issue, then we really have to assess what kind of thinking we are relying on when we are approaching education, and what it means moving forward and looking at the results that we are getting. So please, Maria, if you could make your contributions on the issue. Karibu.
Sorry about that. I had muted myself. So I think, are you asking if we're in a marketplace, or I just wanted to understand your question?
Yes, the question was, we've had a lot of conversation around the commercialization of education.
Okay.
And you made the point on the fact that it costs money for students to go to school.
Yes.
Learning outcomes mean something for the labor market. In terms of the skills and values people have, but also the results themselves determine what progress looks like. And there is always this argument that you are learning for a job, that you're learning so that you get a job, so that you're able to be relevant, so that you are marketable, as it were.
Okay.
So is education for the market? Is education a right that everyone should access, whether they can get a job or not, and it doesn't really matter whether you get a job at the end of the day, so long as your learning is good? And actually, if you went to Form 4 and you said, you know what, thank you very much, Kenya, for the education, I'll stop it there. And with the skills I have, I can survive anywhere. I don't have to go to university. Then, does that make sense? What is education for?
Okay, so first, let's start from the point that it's a right. Everybody in Kenya, first of all, is guaranteed to, on paper, is guaranteed to education. how they get to it is an issue. So let me give you a bit of context also in terms of this widening inequality that we keep talking about. Dr. Otundo has talked about it. Dr. Mugo has talked about it. The fact of the matter is, on the ground, because now you're required to have secondary schools at each primary school. Where is the focus? The focus by government and by our representatives, those are elected members, is to build building. And that's perhaps even is the problem across the board with all our schools. Our focus is on building levy, building a library, building. And of course, it's a practical thing. You don't want our kids to learn under the trees. But the fact is, there's more focus on the hardware as opposed to the software. So if we go back to CBC, because I hear John and Otundo talking about CBC coming to make a difference, can we address first the confusion that it's causing across the board? Because even now, parents are still feeling the burden of CBC as opposed to seeing a way forward. And I think the decision makers, the people we have given the mandate to lead this country at all levels, need to sit at the table and first agree that we need something that is simple and is clearly understood. Because where there is confusion, there's a hijacking in terms of commercialization. There is frustration for parents on the ground because kids will not be able to access schools. And there's focus on charging fees as opposed to dispensing education. So the outcomes that we are looking for as a country, one, is that we have to industrialize. Everybody's talking about that. When you talk about the economy, we're talking about industrialization, we're talking about creating jobs as opposed to finding employment for our kids, because that was for us back in the day. And by now, everybody is wondering how old John and Otuna are. But the fact of the matter is that we used to be told so many, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri. But now the focus is on job creation, because we have a lot of students who are exited out of the 844 system at various points, standard 8, form 4. And even after completing the university education, not being able to find employment. So focus now is the government has to find ways of ensuring that people can find their level of employment, whether it's self-employment, whether it's skills and technology that we are heavily focusing on. Like now, everybody's talking about technology. The focus by the government is on technology, harnessing technology. So, but yet when we look at our education system, the dots are not connecting. So it has to go back to that. If we're going to do CBC, can we first of all get away from this requirement that our children have to buy textbooks that they write in? It's a very redundant way of learning, because first of all, when you write in a textbook, how are you going to pass it along to your siblings or to someone else who's coming behind you? I mean, if you think about now, when you talk about climate justice, even the carbon footprints we are creating, honestly, with this need for paper, that's the first thing. Is our education system connected to the outcomes that we're looking for? We have a vision called Vision 2030 in this country. I feel like it's been abandoned. Are we still on that track? And if we are, is that where CBC is aligning? Is that where, all of us are going? So the fact of the matter is that until we address the issue of charging school fees and the boarding fees that Otundo was talking about, we will not have equality in terms of education and accessing that education. So that's the first thing that needs to be addressed. I like the pronouncement that was made the other day by the CS for, I think, trade. And he talked about the school uniforms. And I think there was a ban. Whether that will be affected or not, because there's pushback about the color, the tone. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle when it comes to the actual intention, educating our children. It is never about that. It is about everything else that is complementary or around that education of that child. So for me, we can be very, very simple and direct about it as a country. We can agree that what is the intention? The intention, we have already stated it in our constitution. It's already captured in an act of parliament. Let us stick to that. The easiest route to that is ensuring that all our children are accessing education. We are fighting in various communities where kids are dropping out of school because they have been married off, or because they have undergone female genital mutilation, or because they have graduated as morans and they have to leave school because it's no longer tenable. And you cannot blame some people, because if going to school means that you will have papers but no access to opportunities to create to create employment for yourself and for others, what is the education for? We have sections in this country where kids are still learning under trees. We have places in this country where schools are not yet registered. They are not even recognized in the education system because they are so far flung from, the center. And when you go back to trying to register a school, you're told, no, it's not your function as a county, it's the function of the Ministry of Education, or it's a function of, there are all manner of things happening. So can we just go back to the basics, which is making sure that children have access to this learning facility, do away with these exams, this focus on exams as a way of grading or assessing children, and make sure there's just transition. So once you're done with, standard, the equivalent of standard 8, now there's junior secondary, there's just progression to high school. And then there's progression to technical or TVET or university, so that you have choice. Because sometimes when the choice is made for you, then that's where the problem is. And that's what's happening, that you're mechanically kicked out of the system or mechanically placed in a system that actually doesn't suit you as a learner. And let's not even forget about the kids with disabilities. Let's not forget about areas that are marginalized, that kids have to move with their parents because they're pastoralists and that's their way of life. If they stay in one place, they'll die. So there are so many inequality issues that we have to address as a country, without focusing so much on passing and this issue, this excitement around celebrating A's and B's and calling people failures. That's the problem that we have, and that needs to be done away with.
Muted. Dr. Otundo, please, if you could make your comments on this, and then we'll take our last round of discussion points and go into the questions. I can see questions coming in the chat section. Please keep the questions coming. Dr.
Thank you. I have seen on the post, and someone has posted something that I was going to talk about. I know there is a lot of emphasis about TVET and CBET, but where I sit, Gilbert, there are so many job seekers now coming from TVET institutions looking for jobs. What is the issue? It is because there hasn't been enough research to ask, what does the industry want? There is a lot of assumption of what the industry wants. We cannot be graduating students from TVET and there are no industries where they would work. So what is going to remain is that I'm going to see graduates from TVET who will pull down our water systems and sell the pipes because they have nothing to do. And so for me, where I stand, I think there needs to be a lot of research on what does really the industry want and where is this that is what the skills are wanted, so that we're not just junking out everybody to no direction. And that's what is happening at the moment. When you come back to the other part, most of the students we have looking for really dire jobs are from social sciences. And why? Because again, we were not keen to match what the industry wants against what we are graduating. And to me, what has been happening for a long time, and that is why there is the aspect of constructing schools, there has been more of schooling than an education. because there is no way out. We can say education takes place in a four walls of a classroom. If I was to use the available resources as we speak, the very available resources in terms of teachers, why must I have students go to school from morning to evening? Why can't I have shifts and we have 1 to 40 students, one teacher to 40, and we have shifts in the same school? Why must you have students go to school in such a huge number only to meet one teacher and sometimes to meet no teacher at all? So in better systems and in well-planned way, we could be having 2 schools running in one institution for a day. One school goes in the morning, they access the same quality teachers, and another group goes in the afternoon. We can easily use the same number of teachers we have at the moment against the huge number of students. The uniform issue for me is a non-issue. If you asked me, in a country that is very progressive, uniform to me is a non-issue. And in fact, heads of schools who are trying to ask for uniforms from students for them to learn, those heads should be terminated their services because it is illegal. It's against Article 53. There is no place where uniform has been covered as a constitutional issue for students to learn. And that's an additive in as far as it is important, but it's an additive that does not describe whether students should be able to learn or not. So we are concentrating more on physical facilities, that is, as Maria puts it, as compared to the software. The next thing I will look at in terms of CBC, there seems to be a confusion on CBC because from the time of inception, very few people took interest in CBC. In fact, there are people who prayed that CBC should not be there. And few people only came to awake, oh, so it is going on. The decision of the president to have CBC in junior secondary primary school was not a new thing. If you go to the basic structure, we have early years education, which runs from PP1 to grade 3. Middle school education runs from upper primary to junior secondary. Then senior, and then we have the senior, the tertiary education and senior, which is level 3. And that level 3 means that a child who has specialized in electrical engineering in a pathway in STEM can go easily to the place of work. Meaning, if I have learned electrical engineering in 4 years, in 3 years in senior school, I can easily go to the place of work. Maybe I have done clothing and textile, or I have done something on hairdressing. Do I really need to go to university to start being productive? The answer is no. So basically, we had 3 levels, and which still exist: early years, middle school, and senior school and tertiary. And basically, junior secondary was aligned to middle school. So even the classroom that were being constructed in secondary school was wrong. They would have done this classroom into workshops instead. And because there was no gap in a classroom in primary schools, the class 7 was still going to remain empty. So basically, the money that was being used to construct secondary schools, construct classrooms in secondary schools, could have constructed workshops. Some of the workshops do not even need hard buildings. If you want to do an engineering workshop, for example, mechanical engineering, provide a shed. Inside that shed, put in some old engines, and learning will still take place. So unless we begin to disconnect the aspect of learning from schooling, we will still be having a challenge to know where education is going and to keep on saying someone has failed and someone has passed. So for me, the thing I need to really be keen on is how are the teachers effectively retooled to handle competence-based education? Because when you look at the world, that is where it is. While the International Baccalaureate, they are using learner profile, their learner profile is the same as the competencies we are looking for. When you look at the British National Curriculum, they are using the learner attributes. Their learner attributes are the same as the competencies. So the terms could be different, but basically we are saying, can we produce learners who are more independent and who can be able even to move out of their parents' pockets as early as possible? The world is not only Kenya. We have space. Like now, today, you realize that students should be graduating and thinking on how they can try to earn a living when they are asleep. And an example is content development. While you are asleep, people are watching your content. You're already making money. Surely, which college do you have to go to today? MasterCard, Google now, MasterCard, Google, Microsoft, they are now employing people who are basically are not graduates of computing science. Why? What are you able to do? And therefore, what I'm trying to say here is that we need to remove the concept of learning from the aspect that it must be in the four walls of a classroom. We need to be keen on the blueprint of what we want to produce and what problem we are going to solve. We talk about technology, leave alone even technology. We have been talking for a long time. Kenya has a problem with food, and there are communities that sleep hungry. But for a long time, agriculture has been optional. So Gilbert, with all your English, tell me you will speak so much English because English is compulsory, but agriculture is optional. Then we go to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Then there is eradication of hunger. How do you eradicate hunger when agriculture in learning is optional? It's all ridiculous. It's not possible to do that. Through English, how do you eradicate diseases? Through English, my friend. So, and health education has been optional, but here you want to eradicate disease through English. You want to talk about eradication of drought and good living, but here you look at life skills has been optional. How do people live? We have no agriculture, no life skills, but English is compulsory, and so you live with your English, but sleep hungry. So that is the serious analogy that needs to be addressed. And conceptually, we need to ask ourselves as an evidence of research, who do we want to produce? Do we want to produce an A student? Do we want to produce a first-class honor student? How does it feel when a first-class honor student is looking for a job and can't find? Because when you leave that university, there's nothing written on your face, first-class honors degree. What is written on your face is, what are you able to do? How are you able to face the challenges of the world? CBC is aligning itself correctly to Sustainable Development Goals, aligning itself correctly to Vision 2030. Now we have Vision 2063. How many of the education stakeholders are keen to see what is in between 2030 and 2063? The teaching and learning pedagogies have remained of the 16th century against a graduate we need to produce of the 21st century. Those things are not aligned. The resources, some of the books students are using in classrooms are not aligned. We are talking about technology. Here you are telling parents, buy a book so that students write as much. Surely, you can't be talking about technology and you are pushing students that you must write a good handwriting, not in the 21st century. Because we need to think about where the global world is. We have people who have never written using a pen, because that's where technology is. But now you're saying we are supposed to be digitally literate, but you're saying, look, buy this book so that you may write as much. We are talking about activity-based learning, but you're saying, buy this number of books so that you can read as much. In as far as we want to get scholars. But what is the aspect of the scholars that we need? I challenge myself as a faculty in a university and ask, who do I release into the world? Do I release first-class students, or do I release a diversified student? Do I release second-class students, or do I release a problem solver? Do I release a job creator? How do you tell a child of Maria who has never slept hungry what it means to work hard to get a job? That is a redefinition we need to think about. So, my friends, is that I feel that if we approach education on the concept of where we want the world to be, where we want Kenya to be, then we will not have a challenge. We'll invest in education in a better way. What do I tell this country, Gilbert? When you have had planned for 3 children, then suddenly your wife delivers 9 children at a go. You get confused. You get confused. So the first thing you need to do is to relax first and say, oh my, it has happened. Can I start planning again? This is what has happened. when there is the issue of 100% transition, the government has panicked. There is so much panic that is leading into a lot of error. There is so much panic that if the government cannot see that, let us get experts, we relax, and to see stage by stage, where do we start solving this problem from? You cannot solve the problem of Nairobi as Nairobi. You must understand and segment education into the slums, into slums and other places. You have to segment the country. What is happening in Lodwar? What is happening in Kapedo against what is happening in well-endowed place like, say, Kiambu? So, but if you just take it as a blank state, say that every child will receive 15,000 for JSS, have you done analysis in a school in Lodwar that does not have a single classroom, not even a single infrastructure? Isn't it frustrating to that principal of a school who takes up that kind of a school against a city school? You are giving the same capitation? No. There should be a bit of, can we sit down, recheck what we are doing, and start our process in a more strategic way? Thank you.
Wow. We've been going for an hour and a half, and I want to start looking at questions. But before we do that, I want to allow our panelists to, if at all it exists, give us a last word or assessment, then we'll go into the questions, and then we'll do our closing remarks. I want to ask Maria or Dr. Mugo, who wants to go first?
Okay, let me speak before Dr. Mugo. I think Dr. Odundo he's just captured it very, very well. He has said it so well that it doesn't need belaboring. His point is just spot on. And the focus really about this, where should these children go? Actually, that's the point I wanted to add on to, that this 100% transition, let it happen. Let us go back to the point where we were in 2001, where kids were 200 in one class. Let it go there, so that even as we are addressing the issue, these kids are learning one way or the other. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot more have been locked out because of the same government policies that are really, really discriminatory in nature. So let's adopt the 100% transition. Let a tent even be built or provided by the government as we are sorting out the rest of the issues.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. For me, Gilbert, just two things to add, and again, Dr. Otundo has put it very well. One is that while we concentrate on CBC, we must remember that we have a generation now between Standard 8 of this year and those that are in Form 4. And those make up to at least 5 million of them. And so we cannot focus so much on CBC while we are losing this generation. When you multiply 5 million by their families and the children they have, it's a half of a generation. And so I don't know why we are still, if we think CBC is the way things are working, why haven't we decolonized secondary education and abolished the stratification of a national extra county that we inherited from the colonial system? So why can't we also apply these CBC principles that we have seen working to improve a little bit? This now 5 cohorts, and you see, meanwhile, we have lost 7 other cohorts since we started implementing CBC. So when you look now in primary schools, for instance, now the ones in grade 7 have new uniform and are putting on trousers and ties, and those in Standard 8, their seniors are still putting on shorts. Those colonial shorts. I don't know where this idea of shorts came from, because at home they now don't put on shorts. So why are we holding on to this? and our challenge government, I think these children cannot wait. Those in Standard 8 now, we cannot take them through again from next year through bad, secondary school because they're not in CBC. I think that really needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. And the other one to just emphasize is the aspect of differentiated funding. I think we know the funding model doesn't work, and everyone knows that. So why are we continuing to apply government money to expand inequality rather than bridge it? And the last thing is that I think Kenyans, we need to understand that while a lot of education happens in the education system, very important education happens at home. And so parents, you cannot stick your children in institutions and you're not there for them. There are things that the teacher who has 60 students will never teach your son or daughter. So I think also parents taking back power, knowing that what will drive this person through life is not just the A, it's also the character formation, is the resilience development, is expanding their perspectives. So parents have abandoned again parenting, that home at school that we saw through COVID. And so that parental engagement and Kenyans knowing that children will not learn values in school. They will not learn good morals and manners in school if they have not learned at home. There are things that will not be taught on the blackboard. They have to be taught out here. When you are overlapping and you are carrying children and children are there, or you are almost knocking them down, just know you are failing society and you are failing a generation. When you are doing those things that we don't want to see in our society, then you know that you're a bad teacher, because everywhere we are, children are observing and they are learning through imitation and demonstration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Otundo, do you have any brief final remarks?
Yes, I have a brief remark on that. I think I want to tell Kenyans listening to this program that CBC is a methodology. That's what I would say, because as an expert in international concept of education, British National Curriculum or Cambridge has very high level content, but there is a lot of emphasis on learner attributes or learner competencies. International baccalaureate the same. So what mission that we can begin to undertake, even through these programs, is to help the teachers who are handling the current class 7 all the way to Form 4 to change their methodology. I think for me, Gilbert, I would rather have students who graduate with higher level competencies, values, and the way of life for now, as opposed to the S we are chasing after. And so what the teachers in grade 8 now need to get to do as we speak is to ensure that they use learner-centered pedagogies to flip the class. Let the learning begin with the learners. Project-based learning. All the learner-centered pedagogies, which are so many, is where the teachers who are handling the current class 8, the current class Form 1, Form 2, all the way up to Form 4. So that these students are not just that they write a composition, but is this composition creative enough to meet the standards where the child can be able to survive in Europe, any other country. So for me, the methodologies that we use in CBC are purely methodologies that have been used in other countries for many years. We in 844 have been using a concept of Bloom's taxonomy of 1956. When there is a revised Bloom's taxonomy of 2001, Gilbert, you can see you are produced under the 1956 Bloom's taxonomy, but Europe is producing a child with the revised one. Look at the analogy, look at the difference. So for me, we can assist teachers who are handling grade 7, grade 8, all the way up to the current Form 4, until when the 844 system is cleared, to use learner-centered pedagogies and to not focus on exams, but focus on the learner. When you ask teachers a question, what do you teach? They mention the subject. Where is the learner in that subject? Why wouldn't you say, I am a teacher of English, but I teach students? But ask any teacher today, what do you teach? They'll say, I'm a teacher, or I teach English, I teach mathematics, meaning there is less focus. Parents who are listening to this program, we need to stop putting unnecessary pressure. Before Kcse or KCPE, Gilbert, parents plus the community, more pastors are brought to the house to pray for Kcse student. More uncles are brought, more aunties are brought. Teachers are also saying, you must pass. These are necessary pressure. Then it is summed all by a police officer holding a gun. as though it is a security issue. We need to disband off this way we are managing. Then people wake up at 4 a.m. to go and look for what? Examinations. So there is too much pressure. Why would the students fail? Too much praying unnecessarily. At what time? At only the last minute. Why are you not praying across board? Why won't you pray for these students from the way they started learning up to the examination period? Why only at a specific time? Teachers are giving more rules and regulations. Where were those rules and regulations? A police is there with a gun. There is unnecessarily too much frisking, showing the students that we don't even trust them in their own country. So there are things that needs to change and bring the natural aspect of learning and linking that to exams. And finally, to my fellow Kenyans who are listening to this program, let us embrace change. If we want to really change this country, we will not be talking about climate justice and we are cutting down trees and planting none. We will not be talking about, we will be wasting our time. That we have no innovative ways on alternative sources of energy, but the time we are crying, there is a lot of drought. And so it is a matter of action. And then to legal practitioners who are here, let us defend Article 53, Section 1B, for the sake of our children. Article 54, for the sake of our children. Article 55, for the sake of our children. When we run for human rights, for adults, let's quickly ensure we protect children 24/7 in access of quality education that is relevant. It can be quality but not relevant. That's my take. And to the media, let us look for value addition as opposed to summative assessment grade A of 400 marks. Thank you.
Wow, that's a wonderful way to conclude it and transition into the questions. Thank you so much to our panelists. If I could just read out some of the questions, some of them are directed and some are open-ended. I think the first question comes from Joy K, who says, hello, John Mugo, great discussion. Trying to understand what has changed with the county system. This is because even 20 years ago, some schools still had the monopoly of getting the top students. And thus we had the usual schools dominating. Schools such as Tarehe, Alliance, Mangu, etc. have always been top schools. What is going on?
So that colonial system was never right. And so Alliance, you know, Nairobi School, Lenana, Kenya High were actually schools for the white. And so I wouldn't actually be bothered a lot, you know, what happens to for me, those schools should die for education to resurrect. So I think what we need is a renaissance, focusing on every student, not on a few, focusing on all government schools. If you go to India, even how a gate looks like, how you know the color of the government school, all looks the same. So the people here, many of us are products of those schools that were favored. But look at how now the whole society is suffering because we never carried everyone along. We focused on a few, glorified a few, you know, 10%, top 10%, and ignored the rest. And now we want them to also come and make their contribution. How? You know, when the system alienated them, historically. So I think for me, we should be speaking about every school, not about a few schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. If I could read some more comments. Honorable David Tutek says it's unfortunate our education system is geared towards just grading and far from value installing process where more is transferred mentally, physically, and spiritually. Education plus value, that is moral and ethics, equals progressive systems of a successful nation. And Eric Makapila says, even as the 844 grading system fades away, there still exists another monster in our education system, in quotes, high cost being incurred by JSS parents. Modalities should be put in place to curb JSS school admins from overcharging parents. I think that buttresses with a question that I will pose to the panel again. I think this can go to Dr. Otundo, which is a question from Roslyn Osugo. CBC for sure, if well implemented, is likely to address our concerns. But was it necessary to change the structure of education? Couldn't the good CBC changes be infused in the existing 844 structure? Overhauling the whole structure is what I think is making it so expensive. What do you say about the cost?
Right. I think it is what I would say that Gilbert is poor interpretation of the curriculum. If you look at the concept in the curriculum designs, and I'll give an example, there is a place written suggested learning experiences, but teachers carry them as they are, and they create a cost from there. But there is the keyword suggested, meaning you can use your own. And that is why you would not force children in Capedo to go and swim on the desk or in the sand, just because that experience is suggested. Number two, Roslyn talks about infusing this in 844. Remember, 844 is not a curriculum, it is a structure of a curriculum. And it was purely content-based curriculum. And here we are looking at the concept of what is the learner able to do. That is, looking at the learners in the concept of outcome. So this one comes in as outcome-based. 844 was a structure, and in it you can see it leaves out one critical area. It says 844, 8 years in primary, 4 years in secondary, 4 years in university. It leaves out the beginning of learning, early years education. There is no country that can succeed without emphasizing on the quality of education in early years. Nothing. And that is why in Western countries, teachers who handle early years are high-stake teachers. You get Dr. So-and-so in early years. You get all levels of high-level teachers in early years. 844 did not recognize that. Number two, 844 is the mess that introduced the concept of failure and success. You fail at class 8 or you succeed because you have gone into a good school. You fail at Form 4 or you succeed because you have either gone to university or not. So the definition of failure, as it is defined today associated with exams, is as a result of the concept called 844. What is happening in the name of the structure? The name of the structure brings in the recognition of early years and bringing early years to cover up to the level 3, that is PP1 up to grade 3. Brings in that concept where learners learn through activities. Then it brings in the concept of middle school education, where students begin to think about their pathways and where they are best at. And that is why we have the 3 academies in senior school: Sports Academy, we have the Social Science Academy, and the STEM side of the academy. So true, yes, I can say that 30 years down the line, it would be difficult for us to say we would infuse concept of a 21st century curriculum into a 16th century curriculum, because 844 for me, I never count it as a curriculum. It is purely a structure in which you operate. But the curriculum itself, it will be very difficult when you say you'll bring the concept of CBC and bring it here, because competency-based, value-based, all that is found here. But remember, 844, it's about how many marks, where do you go? And just a parting shot to answer that, Gilbert, if you want to go to Form 1 using 844, you do not have to go to school from 6 to 6. You can simply go to class 8, write your name on the paper, but the names are written plus the pictures. Guess, number 1, A, B, 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 C, C, C. When you finish the circle, you start again. Because in every 4 answers in 844, there is always an A or a B or a C. which competence does the student acquire in that concept of guesswork? When it comes to Form 4, you simply write the name on your paper, collect the paper according to what is the requirement of marking. Once you've written your name, you'll get 0, 0, 1. 0, 1 is an E. So it's easier to get all those E's. But when you go back to the Constitution, where Gilbert has scored 7 E's and got a certificate, the Constitution says that the qualifications of a village elder is a Form 4 leaver. So between Gilbert and Maria, Maria's English but dropped out in Form 2, but she has competencies. But Gilbert finished Form 4 out of writing the name on the paper, but he has a certificate. He becomes the village administrator. Maria doesn't. So the village is doomed because there is nobody with competencies to run the village. So that is the big concept as to why not have a major review?
Thank you so much, Dr. Otundo. If I can direct this question to Maria, Edith says, I think we need to look through into where CBC and CBET are really going. We keep saying that we are creating linkages with the industry, and yet even the TVET graduates, a big chunk of them are struggling to remain in sustainable work situations. Because you get a gig here, a gig there, then the rest of the time you're busy looking for work. How is the market creating jobs?
Thank you. Edith, that's a very, very sound observation. See, I talked about connecting the dots. And I think we've covered this in our discussion as we've gone along, that as long as we are testing what Otundo is calling summative assessment, then you're going to have the same problems, and you're going to still have people looking for jobs. Even the TVET graduates, what is it that they are trained to do? You understand? How is the system designed at the TVET level? If you're gaining a skill so that you can go look for employment, that's already a problem. As opposed to using that skill to do something with it. I don't know if I'm making sense here. That as long as we're churning out graduates or students to go look for employment, that will always be the problem. But also, as long as the government is not cognizant of the fact that we must industrialize so that we can adopt all these graduates who are out of school within those industries and find placement for them within those industries, within different sectors. It doesn't have to be one thing that is being manufactured. That's why I liked the idea during the campaigns of one county, one product. And I don't know if you remember those suggestions. It didn't have to necessarily be one product. But if you look at, say now, even the way the design of the education system is that the county governments are responsible for the ECDs. Then the national government is responsible from standard 1 going on, and so on and so forth. The minute we start then designing, the minute we stop thinking that these students are going to be churned out to go find employment, then we're going to be able to fix this problem that Edith is talking about. That if the CBC is designed in such a way that the students or the learners are trained in such a way and that they appreciate and absorb that education in such a way that they see themselves as creators of opportunity, creators of employment themselves, then we will be able to have addressed that issue. But as long as we are just churning out students from our education system so that it becomes a problem of the next phase, then we're still going to have that issue of unemployment, and we're going to have that issue of TVET, because then the TVET, we have just now made the problem, the already existing problem, we've now designed it and pushed it into the corner of TVETs. Now you deal with the failures, because that's how they are described. In fact, you should listen to the public barazas that wale walianguka mtihani waende TVET. So already then you've created another problem in that kind of thinking. So let's address the approach, the software, the DNA of education in this country. Let's address that by seeing the education system as an enabler to be able to survive in the 21st century. That because if you cannot read and write, then who are you mingling with. Add then the value addition that Otundo was talking about, above reading and writing, meaning you can communicate. What skill can you add on to reading and writing? Because we are all different. There are kids who, no matter what you do, will never, ever be able to become doctors. There are kids who will never even be interested in becoming a lawyer like you and I, Gilbert. But there are kids who, from the minute they get into school, they're just interested in building things. There are people who are making these chargers in Kenya. What are these things called? These ones for charging your phones. Yeah, the cables. There are people who are manufacturing them. Do they need to go into the system of education in such a way that they end up, in my opinions, wasting time learning English? Or I know Tundo was talking about agriculture being a compulsory subject, but can we focus? And that's why I think the competency-based learning was so attractive for us as Kenyans, because then we are going to be grading these children based on their competencies. But is that exactly what is happening? Or are we also still then just baptizing 844 into CBC and still grading these kids wholesome? So we have to be very intentional. And it means then that investing more in how these kids learn and how these kids are then moved from one stage to the other. They are progressed, they are not exited out. So I hope that answers the question by Edith.
Thank you so much. To our last question, because we are now running out of time, this I'll direct to Dr. Mugo. Murugi K asks, does the government ever make decisions based on data, on any feasibility studies that are conducted, or cost effectiveness studies, qualitative understanding of how CBC is working for different demographics? I've really always wondered how we as external stakeholders can hold government accountable for making decisions that are informed by some form of evidence.
I think, yeah, Murugi, that's honestly my biggest frustration. And when you talk about government, you talk about individuals, because when you look at, who is government, it's actually characters, it's individuals, and they go into government with their own personal and individual expectations, and mostly don't care much about evidence. There are things they believe they want to do, and they end up doing them. So when you look at all that is happening, I mean, there are many things that are done, and the evidence is showing us to the contrary. But you see, because, for instance, the issues that Maria and Dr. Otundo have addressed, when you look at the entire northeastern and the north of Kenya, the fact that there aren't so many votes there anyway, no one cares much, and so the the effect of politics on decisions, I think, without considering research and evidence, is the biggest frustration. So I don't know what honestly can be done so that people in parliament, the parliamentarians, are going to parliament to throw tantrums because a certain study has shown this level of inequality. You find them fighting over their allowances. But I think also we are the ones who have created that political elite. So we are also to blame. I think I don't know where we are headed, but a rights-based approach, I think, is one thing. If I'm so glad here, because lawyers and educationists have shared platform. I think it's my first time, honestly, and if we can have this cross-sectoral approach, because education will never solve the problems of society. We place unreasonable expectations on education and what school can be. Education will not solve the problems of society. It has to be also health, it has to be politics, it has to be the land policies, it has to be water, it has to be security. All these things have to happen for education to work for us. And we have all this evidence, but again, I think the people who go to power and are in charge of decisions think about themselves first. And this, the concept of the public, the common good has disappeared. And I think that is what is eating us. You think about yourself first. You have no critical thinking to see how what is happening around you will affect you, and even what you are trying to accumulate as yourself. So when our leaders become selfless and look and prioritize the common good, I think is when change will start to happen.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. Just so profound, so poignant, a lot to think about. I definitely have to reconsider how much English I speak and how much agriculture I practice. And and on a very serious note, think about what it means to take us back to first principles on what this economy needs and how that relates to learning, what society needs and how that relates back to learning, and what learning needs and how that relates back to legal practice and even to lawyers and what we are doing. I think it's been such a profound conversation for which we are so grateful for everyone joining us. I've taken almost 5 pages of notes here, which I'm going to be digesting. No, this is actually 6 pages of notes, which I'm going to sit down and digest. I want to say that this was live streamed on YouTube, and the live stream will remain available on YouTube. We'll send an email round for those who signed up. We'll send an email round with the link so that you can share with others for the conversations. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who was here. Thank you to our panelists for making the time. Thank you so much for honoring us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you to those who made time to sit through the conversation, whether it was for 15 minutes, for 5 minutes, or through the entire 2 hours, because we've been here for 2 hours now. And we'll continue talking. In about 2 weeks, we will have our next webinar, which will be on defunding and privatizing public universities, which is the next agenda that the government has right now. And we are going to have a panel that will be discussing the government's move to defund public universities and then to privatize them. We know that the privatization bill is already out, and there's been a call for public participation that is due by the 7th of February. And it has specific meanings on higher education, tertiary education in this country. So I welcome you again to join us in those 2 weeks and to make your contributions. Please reach out to us on our email at info@kcse.org. That is info, I-N-F-O, at kcse.org. If you want to participate in the panel, if you have things that you want to share, if you want to participate in our projects, if you want to join our newsletter, and let's keep talking, let's keep engaging, let's keep Kenya first and keep fighting for this country as best as we can in every sector that we are based in. Asanteni sana, everyone. I wish you a good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.